explore how we could use meditation to recognize our higher self. This morning's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit. How do you know the voice you hear is your higher self subconscious and not your wandering mind? The individual continues, I have a hard time knowing what thoughts to trust as my true thoughts. Some say you'll just know, but I really feel like I don't. By the way, anyone who tells you just know doesn't know. And they're putting the onus on you. Instead of having the courage to tell you they don't know, they're just trying to make you feel bad for even asking. And sadly, that is a common ploy. So let's begin with some broad brushstrokes, beginning with the yin and yang of it all. In the 81, when reading the 81 poems of the Tao Te Ching, it becomes clear that we are to avoid yang and embrace yin. We are to avoid being rigid, fearful, suspicious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel, and instead embrace being flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. But those 16 attributes can be difficult to juggle, so let's simplify them on down. We are to forsake being rigid and controlling, and instead be flexible and laid back. So I've said all of that to say this. Analysis is a form of control. And it makes sense. Our ancestors evolved in a dangerous world. We evolved mechanisms to help us survive. And those same mechanisms that evolved to help us survive ironically undermine our ability to emotionally thrive, because those are two different things. And so our controlling tendencies, while might keep us alive long enough to procreate, will undermine our ability to have a truly peaceful, joyful, loving, fulfilling life. Let us consider equanimity, the seventh enlightenment factor, or to be more precise, the seventh of 7 enlightenment factors. How does that work? Equanimity teaches us to have the same response to whatever we experience. Whatever sight, sound, sensation, flavor, scent, or the like we experience. Whatever emotion, intention, thought, memory, or imagining we experience. But what response is that? That response is to notice as we breathe in, vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. And as we exhale, to both physically relax and mentally release. Whether that which we perceive is external or internal, physical or mental, pleasurable or painful, interesting or boring, glorious or grotesque. So let's take a closer look at this through the lens of neuroscience. Every time we breathe in, whether we know it or not, we are accessing our sympathetic nervous system. Ensconced within the thoracic or ribcage region of our spinal cord, it did not evolve to indulge either extreme of mind blanking or active concentration. Instead, the sympathetic nervous system evolved to just notice, and to do so vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. This is the key to mindfulness. But what do we do with all the stuff that we notice? Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we are wired to automatically access our parasympathetic nervous system, ensconced within both the lower lumbar region of our spinal cord, as well as the tippy top of the cervical region, which could also be described as our brainstem. This bad boy has evolved to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. So the great irony is that mindfulness and meditation are natural and automatic functions of our autonomic nervous system. The sad irony is that our idiot savant of a brain often trips over it, steps on its own dick, and gets in the way. But fortunately, it's good-hearted, kind of like Urkel. And if we give it a job, it'll do it with the utmost of enthusiasm. For instance, if during our inhalation we ask our brain to silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this, it will actually cooperate with our sympathetic nervous system. And during our exhalation, when we give our brain the job of silently and mentally reciting the one-syllable verb ease, it will harmonize with the functions of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is very, very convenient. But what has that to do with mastering equanimity? That is best answered by exploring the litmus test of fear and love. When one is reading the Christian New Testament, specifically the first epistle of John, one is exposed to the notion that perfect love drives out fear, that there is an antithetical relationship between fear and love. Further, in that same book, when the reader is told that God is love, and whether that is literal or whether that is metaphoric is beside the point at this point. My understanding, if I recall correctly, is that contemporary functional magnetic resonance imaging studies have verified that either our blood collects at our amygdala, our fear center, or our anterior cingulate gyrus, our love center. So what the ancients philosophized has been verified by contemporary imaging technologies. We are in fear, or we are in love. But what has that to do with mindfulness and meditation? Glad you asked. In our tragically patriarchal society, we are taught to actively concentrate by relying upon such neurological structures as our prefrontal cortex, as the medial region of our prefrontal cortex, and we are taught to actively analyze, to actively contemplate by relying on such structures as our dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Remember that old saw, don't teach a pig to sing, it'll waste your time and ignore the pig? Well, when we over-rely on our prefrontal cortex, we can exhaust it, which can cause our central nervous system to present with many of the symptoms of depression, which I would not recommend. The more we rely upon active concentration and active analysis, the more our blood collects at our amygdala. But here's the really cool thing. When we give our prefrontal cortex a relaxing break, by replacing active concentration with the passive mindfulness, the mindfulness that is vulnerable, passive, visceral, and random, that comes from relying upon our sympathetic nervous system accessed during our inhalation. And when we trade out relying upon active analysis by practicing the passive meditation that comes from accessing our parasympathetic nervous system during our exhalation, then our blood mass shifts from our cranky amygdala to our empathetic, compassionate, and loving anterior cingulate gyrus, which functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, which is pretty cool. So we are the more loving we are, the more we are in our autonomic nervous system. This is why the greatest Dzogchen Lamas of Tibet have insisted that the highest love is spontaneous and uncontrived. But what has that to do with our higher self? There are many synonyms for higher self. One is Tathagata, which could be translated as either Buddha essence or Buddha nature. I like Buddha nature because Buddha essence sounds like it's a euphemism for doing the hibbity-dibbity. So, what if higher self was just a way of referring to parts of our brain that really couldn't be described accurately in the Iron Age? What if our higher self, what if our Buddha nature was just a metaphor for living in harmony with our sympathetic nervous system, our parasympathetic nervous system, and our anterior cingulate gyrus, the seat of mindfulness, the seat of meditation, and the seat of empathy? So what if our job is neither to believe nor disbelieve our thoughts, or our perceptions, emotions, intentions, recollections, or imaginings? What if our job was simply to notice them and release them passively, vulnerably, viscerally, and randomly in harmony with our inhalation and our exhalation? So how do we do that? How do we dance with our higher self? How do we cooperate effortlessly and effectively and efficiently with our higher self? How do we cease to be a marionette of our lower self, instead be an emissary of our higher self? Glad you asked. Consider, if you will, this piece of art. The skull, the color of a cumulus cloud, appears to be actively sporting a tantric union. This reminds us that contrivance will always be trumped by spontaneity. Consider her partner the color of the azure sky, and how he appears to be passively savoring the same tantric union. This reminds us that not all flavors of spontaneity are the same. Number 3, it also reminds us that the scattered spontaneity we occasionally experience, like that experience we have after downing our third espresso in 30 minutes, that scattered spontaneity will always be trumped by centered spontaneity. The same spontaneity, the same centered spontaneity that is the effortless byproduct of mindfulness and meditation. In fact, now this is the payoff, the more that our choices and utterances and deeds flow from the effortless effort of love's centered spontaneity, the more our life could be as blissful as a real or imagined Buddha's paradise or Pure Land, or if you prefer Sanskrit, Vati. Our job is not to analyze our intellectual experience. Our job is to watch and release in harmony with our inhalation and our exhalation. The more we do this, the more we will find ourselves in the zone of our higher self. I do look forward to practicing the finer details, the application of this with you, after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I've spent more About 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each sect of Buddhism so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. I do look forward to practicing with you. So we just have a few sets of exercises that we're going to circuit through. Just as a sprinter might limber up, might loosen up their muscles before they race, let's play with some preliminary contemplations. These contemplations are passive and visceral and easy and fun, and they just help us to sort of limber up. So let us bring the 4 bases of mindfulness, the circumstantial, the physical, the interpersonal, and the mental, into the path of impermanence. Please chant with me. Observing the coming and going of circumstantial phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Let us now play with a recitation that is silent and mental and passive. During our inhalation, we can silently and mentally recite the noun lots, which functions as a synonym of circumstances. And during our exhalation, let us silently and mentally recite the verb melt, which is a metaphor of change. Now, what would be very cool is if we perform this together for 4 rounds, assuming that a round is simply 1 inhalation followed by 1 exhalation. So what we can do is advance the tip of our left thumb during each inhalation and begin by counting upon our left little finger. Please chant with me. Observing the coming and going of physical phenomena, help us to feel that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Forms here is used as a 1-syllable synonym of bodies. Observing the coming and going of interpersonal phenomena, help us to hear that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. We're using feels as a 1-syllable synonym for relationships. Let's count upon our left middle finger. Observing the coming and going of mental phenomena, help us to viscerally grok that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Let's count upon our left index finger. Now let us bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and letting go in the manner that we described during the opening lesson. So, thus far we've learned how to count 16 rounds upon our left hand. On our right hand we can count sets. Our first set of 16 rounds, our second set of 16 rounds, and so on. Welcome to this morning's live stream. The moment you have a specific question about Buddhist chanting, Buddhist meditation, Buddhist philosophy, or how to apply them, simply type your question in great detail in the chat window. Let us bring the 4 bases of mindfulness into the path of loving kindness. Since we are not alone in our mental frustrations, we could also long that others' mental needs also be met. And so, just as if we invited a friend over for lunch and we might ladle lentils into their pool, we are using words to guide our will, that we could lavish, that all minds of all beings everywhere be lavished with wisdom. But it's just this, an exercise in intention. We're not trying to work magic. We're not trying to actively visualize. We're not trying to believe. We're just playing with words. Since we are not alone in our interpersonal frustrations, we could also long that others' interpersonal needs also be met. So let us lovingly wish that all beings everywhere enjoy loving relationships, be they vocational, personal, platonic, or intimate. Since we are not alone in our physical frustrations, we could also long that others' physical needs also be met. Since we are not alone in our circumstantial frustrations, we could also long that others' circumstantial needs also be met. So we're using the word boon as a one-syllable synonym for circumstantial good fortune. Having climbed Let's return to bringing the 4 bases of mindfulness, the Satipatthana 4 bases of mindfulness, into the path of anicca impermanence. Observing the coming and going of circumstantial phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Welcome to this morning's live stream. The moment you have a specific question about Buddhist chanting, Buddhist meditation, Buddhist philosophy, or how to apply them, type your question in great detail in the chat window. Observing the coming and going of physical phenomena, help us to feel that ever-changing one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. Observing the coming and going of interpersonal phenomena, help us to hear that ever-changing one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. Observing the coming and going of mental phenomena, help us to clearly perceive that ever-changing one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. Having practiced passive contemplation, we come now to mindfulness and meditation, where we bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and letting go. During our inhalation, we could silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this, as we perceive, emote, intend, reason, recall, and imagine. During our exhalation, we could silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease as we physically relax and mentally release. Let us bring the 4 bases of mindfulness into the path of metta, loving kindness. Since we are not alone in our mental frustrations, we could also long that others' mental needs also be met. Since we are not alone in our interpersonal frustrations, we could also long that others' interpersonal needs also be met. Since we are not alone in our physical dukkha frustrations, we could also long that others' physical needs also be met. Since we are not alone in our circumstantial frustrations, we could also long that other circumstantial needs also be met. Observing the coming and going of circumstantial phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. Observing the coming and going of physical phenomena, help us to feel that ever-changing one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. Observing the coming and going of interpersonal phenomena, Help us to hear that ever-changing one, and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Observing the coming and going of mental phenomena, help us to clearly perceive that ever-changing one, and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Let us seal this morning's practice by percussively chanting loving wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. May all minds clear yet... Oops, let's try that again. May all minds clear yet impermanent be as enlightened as a Buddha's mind. May all relationships resounding yet impermanent be as loving as a Buddha's speech. May all bodies sensual yet impermanent be as beautifully healthy as a real or imagined Deva's form. May all circumstances appearing yet impermanent be as safe and abundant as a real or imagined Devi's land. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 10.5 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.